Well, good morning. I hope you're enjoying this Labor Day weekend. Labor Day means September is here, and we can look forward to all the changes that come with that page on the calendar. During autumn, it's a good time to keep an eye on the weather, because in Upper Michigan, it can go in a lot of different directions at this time of year. This morning, we'll be talking with one of the people who can keep us up to date on the forecast. We'll meet him right now.
From TV6, this is the Ryan Report. Now, here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, you can see our guests this morning providing the latest weather reports on the TV6 weekend news and occasionally during the week as well. But who is he? Where did he come from? And how did he get to be an expert on weather? Today, we'll talk about those questions and more as we visit with Eric DeBroca. Eric, welcome to the Ryan Report.
Thank you, Don. You are too kind to call me an expert on weather, but how about a student of weather may be more appropriate?
Well, I don't know. I think they pay you to be an expert on weather.
They do pay me to be an expert.
You're from the Cleveland area?
Yeah, just from the near west side of Cleveland, and we share some similarities between here and Marquette as far as weather goes, and that we both have lake effect, Lake Erie there, and of course Lake Superior here.
Okay, and we'll talk more about that as we get along. There's also a historic connection, which you weren't aware of, but
How have you talked about this?
all of the iron mining companies at one time were headquartered in Cleveland, including Cleveland Cliffs, which has played a big part in this area. But Ogilvy Norton and M.A. Hanna, Pecans Mather, all of the iron ore industry was, and still is, headquartered in Cleveland, but it's much smaller. And of course, you know, there's a connection with weather with the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Yeah, no, there certainly is there. They've had some interesting weather down there, which affected boats and a lot of ships there back in the day, and of course Lake Superior too, known for its where things don't resurface because the waters, of course, are so cold.
Right. Was there any indication that you might be interested in weather when you were a kid?
You know, I think for a lot of meteorologists, the answer is yes, and for me, the answer is same too. Yeah, I always found weather fascinating. What I think is the most incredible aspect of weather, how it impacts every single person on the face of the earth, and there's nothing we can do about it. And so, but being able to try to predict those parameters, and knowing that weather has an impact on every single aspect of our life. And here's something. Here's one deep thought for you, Don. You know, it affects most people are here or not here because of how cold it is and how much snow we get here. Most people are in say, more tropical regions like Florida because of the weather. You know, but when we do that, we take jobs, we meet people, we may meet our future spouses, and but what's in the background of those big decisions? Weather.
Right. You know, I did a little commentary here once about the fact that weather is probably the most common topic of conversation. If you meet someone you don't know very well and you want to say something, you know, about anything. Oh, how's the weather? Or how about this weather?
Never ask a meteorologist that, though. They'll give you far more than what you ever asked for.
Now, what I want to know is, you know, and I did the weather on TV6 for 5 years. I was not a meteorologist. I could not produce a forecast. I depended on what we call the Weather Bureau then. Mm-hmm. What does it take to become a professional meteorologist?
Well, I would say a lot of things, like schooling for sure, and this means getting your degree in atmospheric science. So I have a Bachelor of Atmospheric Science, I have a minor in geography, but what's absolutely needed are the credentials for predicting weather, and with that, there's a lot of coursework that's required. The weather parameters include physics, chemistry, thermodynamics, and a lot of math, and those are just the prerequisites. Then you start getting into the core classes about how all of those actually affect the weather patterns that we see today.
You know, we see a guy on weather or a woman doing the weather on TV, and you know, we kind of think it's an entertainment thing, but really to be a meteorologist is a scientist, isn't it?
We are, yeah, right. We are scientists of weather, and perhaps those that you see on camera don't get to fully explain that scientific aspect of it, because we're meant to take that hard science and we're meant to present it to the public in an understandable manner and have them apply it to their daily life.
The fact that you picked Ohio State, are they particularly strong in this kind of thing? Or,
yeah,
of course, they're a major university, so
they are. They are big, one of the largest in the country, actually. But yeah, I chose Ohio State because they were only one of the few colleges in Ohio that have that degree, and there are not many of them throughout the country. Actually, there's close to 60,000 students at Ohio State. What's incredible is that my class sizes had 12 to 15 students. We're
Right.
talking a really small college. All of a sudden, a big city turned into a tiny college for us.
Now, Did your college training relate at all to becoming a TV meteorologist?
No, this is one thing that maybe people might be surprised to find out is that what the colleges do, they train you in all the coursework and nothing to do with broadcasting. If you want to do that, you basically have to go your own route and take your own steps to becoming a broadcast meteorologist, which include internships, which include doing things for the campus. Like I was on Buckeye TV every week, which actually got my start on TV. Dreadful forecast, by the way, but hey, you can certainly learn a lot from those old days there. But what they train you is you can be more of an operational meteorologist, like at the Weather Service.
So your training would allow you to work for the Weather Service?
It would allow you for the background or the basis to work there. However, if you want to work at the Weather Service or any government agency, such as the Hurricane Center, Storm Prediction Center out of Oklahoma, any of the other ones too, the Prediction Center, you need a master's. And so a bachelor's is a must-have for TV, but if you want to pursue that even more so for the government, you at least have to show that you're going to work towards a master's degree.
What other career possibilities are there? There's some private services, I guess.
Oh yeah, a lot of people just think of meteorology as being on TV, but that's just one of the many avenues for it. I mean, there's a lot of private firms that will hire you, and these go unnoticed, of course, but they'll hire you and you give a daily forecast and you'll be employed by them, privately contracted. There's stuff for aviation, flying planes, we need meteorologists for that, for the government, but all different types of agencies that you don't hear about, which are doing the same thing that we do, basically.
But they want you to be accurate then, don't they?
They want you to be very accurate,
you better
yeah.
be accurate.
They're not
Okay.
saying that to as many people as the public as we are, but certainly they have just as important of a role.
Okay, we've got a lot more questions about the weather. We'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. Our guest this morning, a familiar face here on TV6, Eric DeBroca, who is our weekend weather guy and fills in during the week as well. Eric, let's talk about weather. And you had pointed this out, that weather really affects all of us.
Yeah.
It's a natural phenomenon. We can't change it. What are the biggest factors in determining weather?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on when you're talking about weather and climate too, and of course weather being short-term, climate being long-term. But the main factor is there's a lot of science behind it, but let's try to simplify it here, is of course the sun. The sun is the main primary driver of all climate across our entire planet. Number two, though, is going to be the oceans. The oceans have a major role in affecting and playing weather and how what we're going to be having as far as temperatures go. And what the oceans do is they play a big moderating effect on the solar radiation which comes from our sun. And if it wasn't for the role of the ocean, near the equator it would be unbearable, it'd be too hot to live, and near the North and South Pole, and I mean just near them, would be unbearable either. You wouldn't be able to survive there.
Well, and you had mentioned it, in putting some thoughts together ahead of time that there's a purpose to weather, and I didn't quite understand it, but it really was what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's that weather has a purpose. It serves as a primary function in that, you take the Earth as a rotating sphere, and of course it has a 23.5-degree tilt, which just means that you're going to have a lot more sunshine or more of an angle at the equator and a lot less at the poles. And so with that said, that you're going to have this disparity between heating or energy. And the sole purpose of climate is to even out these differences. We have a lot more energy at the equator and a lot less at the poles. And so what weather does is it allows everything to be balanced out. If this difference in energy or in pressure and in temperature, specifically those two, didn't exist, we wouldn't have weather today.
Okay, and these places would be unbearable in some cases.
They would be.
Some parts of the Earth.
Some parts of the Earth would be.
Now, when people watch the weather, and it was back the same when I was doing it, we see a map with some big H's and L's and some lines that we call fronts. Obviously there aren't big H's moving across the United States. What are we really seeing?
Weather is really abstract too, because we can try to draw it in a concrete manner, these weather maps, and we draw fronts and we draw the highs and the lows and we draw rain. But these are all things that you really can't see in the atmosphere. When we're talking about physics, why physics is the number one player in weather is because we're talking about microscopic things happening. We're talking about molecules and particles at work, airflow, currents. things you really can't see. We can see the effect of them through wind, but really, what's interesting is that so you're taking an abstract concept and trying to apply it in a very concrete manner, which isn't easy. But the highs and the lows, what they do tell us is that high pressure. So here's a 101 lesson here.
Okay.
Areas of high pressure, we know generally that they signify good weather or clear weather, and areas of lower pressure signify cloudy weather and generally rain and usually more humid, moist air. And so the premise behind that is areas of higher pressure, you have air molecules at the surface of the Earth. Say you're under an area of higher pressure. What happens is the air will sink and it will compress, and so which means that there's more air coming on, there's more air molecules coming onto the surface as the air is sinking. And so what that means is the air is going to be higher pressure. When you see an area of lower pressure, air is actually converging like a funnel, say a funnel in a tornado or in a drain of your sink. The air is converging, and what happens then, the air rises from the center of that low pressure system, and all premise of weather, be it hurricanes or storms or just clouds, an area of instability of lower pressure, and you're getting that rising motion from that lower pressure system.
We're just going to have to take your word for it. But when we see those...
A lot there, I know.
I know when I was doing the weather years ago, the guy at the Weather Bureau would always talk about watch out for the Colorado lows. That they would bring the snowstorms. Weather typically does move from west to east, doesn't it? And sometimes northwest to southeast.
Yep, for us here in the northern hemisphere, actually what a lot of people are confused with in the southern hemisphere too, they think that it moves across from the east, but that's not so. Weather moves from west to east in both hemispheres in the mid-latitudes, which means we're of course here in the mid-latitudes. It just means above the tropics and below the North Pole, the polar regions. And both areas in both hemispheres move from west to east, or at least some variation of that, northwest as you said, southwest. And that's due to one primary factor, the way the Earth rotates. It rotates from west to east, and we'll call that the Coriolis force, the Coriolis effect upon the Earth, and it will have a rotating effect to look like the systems go from west to east.
I don't know if we have time to finish it up in this segment, but occasionally we hear you or Carl Bonak talk about the European model. What are these models, number one, and how does it all come about?
Oh, there's a lot involved in these, basically supercomputers. The GFS model is the American one. It stands for the Global Forecasting System.
And who manages that?
Okay, so the American government does.
Okay.
And that's why it's a free service. And why the European model is a little bit better, but back in the day, back just a few years ago, the European model was a lot better. And it has proven so in major storms like Hurricane Sandy. It's usually the first one to indicate changes, and then whereas the other models don't jump aboard until later on. But one of the main factors is that there's more variations. What's called a four-dimensional variation is what the European model does. And what it does is, before it does a forecast, it'll take different points, and it'll use those points for the last couple hours, and it'll change its forecast based on these premises. Whereas the American model will take one point and forecast it.
Okay.
That's why it's seeking to get better.
We've got to stop here. We'll be back with more about weather in just a couple of minutes. Again, this morning we're talking with one of our TV6 meteorologists, Eric Dubroca. Before we leave this idea of the model,
Sure.
Really what they're doing is providing information for people like you, right?
Yeah, they really are. And the supercomputers, these weather models, have come a long way in the last several years. That's why your last segment there, we talked about the GFS, or the European model. The GFS, they're making all these modifications to make them better, to make it, give them more algorithms, and these complex things that we don't talk about. We put those into these supercomputers, and they are able to give us better forecasts.
Then they come on your plate and you see how they work for us.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that quickly, but the fact that forecasting weather for Upper Michigan is difficult, isn't it? Especially
oh, wow.
when there are at least 4 or 5 or 6 different areas that are involved.
It's amazing. I mean, there's several factors going on here. First of all, the area is so big. You know, you go from Ironwood to Newberry, Copper Harbor, Escanaba, Manistee, all these areas in between, whereas the weather there is very different from each region. So first of all, you're pretty much forecasting for what I say almost an entire state. Not easy to do in of itself. Then you take the factors which affect our weather here in the Upper Peninsula, that of course being, how I said the oceans were the primary cause of weather, as the secondary cause rather. But for us, it's both lakes.
Right.
Lake Superior and Lake Michigan play a critical role in determining our weather. Then you have the orographic situation with the mountains and the hills, which change drastically. I mean, just here to Marquette, only about 7 or 8 miles, where you go 800 feet lower in elevation.
Right. Let's talk about lake effect snow, because that really has a big effect. First of all, how is lake effect snow generated?
Okay, well, I'll just simplify it too by saying that all weather system, you need an instability, or you need areas. So over Lake Superior provides, it's much, in the wintertime, much warmer, moister body of water than as opposed to the cold, dry land. And that's what you need primarily. However, what you need also is an area of lift. And I was talking about that low pressure. You always need, for all weather, you need rising air motion. Whatever can provide that, an area of lower pressure, a frontal system, or even like air lifting over mountains. You need the air to be lifted. And if you can get that going, and you get that instability between the warmer air over Lake Superior and moisture, you need moisture, which these areas of lower pressure help give us clouds and give us moisture over the drier land, and it will dump snowfall.
And of course, the areas that will be affected are determined by the wind.
Yep, so you need an area at least from the north or westerly component, but areas around the UP, of course, that are favored for lake effect snow are going to be the Keweenaw Peninsula. As we talked about last segment there, how the winds primarily blow from the west, and that's why the Keweenaw Peninsula is going to be our major snow belt producer. And areas just east of Marquette as well from that northwesterly wind flow. Marquette, you need a northeasterly wind,
right,
which doesn't happen too often in the winter, but you need a low pressure system just moving rather slowly right close to just east of Marquette to get the winds backing from the northeast.
We've barely scratched the surface. We have only about a minute left. Anything else that you had hoped we would talk about?
Oh, there's so much done. How about basic cloud types? Do I have enough time for that?
Sure.
Okay, so and what they tell. Stratus are the lowest level of clouds, and what stratus means, it just means a deck. And those are between the surface level and 6,500 feet. And those will indicate cloudy, gloomy days, and those will also tell us that bad weather is here in the right now. But as you go higher in the atmosphere, that's where this begins to change. Cumulus are the next type, and of course you can add different layers, altocumulus, cirrocumulus. Those are just different subcategories of cumulus. But all that means is you have convection. The sun is heating the earth, and that air is, again, rising because of the differences in temperature. And so what that means is that there's instability, and especially if you live far enough south, you can expect rain to occur. And then the last major type is going to be cirrus, and those tell us, if you see cirrus clouds, know that the weather is going to be changing in the next 8 to 10 hours, and we can expect some type of rain or snowfall.
Okay, timing was good. We just talked ourselves right out of time.
Okay.
Folks can watch you tonight on the weather.
Yes, they can.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming in. It's a fascinating subject. Like I said, we've just kind of scratched the surface.
Don, I could talk to you for hours about weather and still not be done.
Good to get to know you better and to know a little more about the weather. I'll be back with some other thoughts for you after we take one more break. You know, the recent passing of Jerry Lewis at 91 years of age brought back some memories of the golden age of radio for me. More about Jerry in a minute, but first let me tell you about the radio, the object which there is no doubt had the greatest impact on my early life. Even as a little kid, I was fascinated by it, and I would listen for hours. You know, radio today is very different from back then. When I was a kid, television hadn't really arrived, especially in Upper Michigan, but network radio offered the same kinds of shows that television provides today. The reception on AM radio was also as it is today. During the day, you could only receive the local stations, but as the sun went down, the big city 50,000-watt stations came booming in from the eastern half of the country. And it was those big city stations that carried the network programs featuring the big stars of that era. Comedies were always my favorite. Fibber McGee and Molly was at the top of the list, followed by Jack Benny, Bob Hope, The Great Gildersleeve, Red Skelton, and more. There were westerns, detective stories, mysteries like The Shadow, even continuing serials for kids like Bobby Benson and the B-Bar-B Riders. It's fun to think about the radios themselves back in those days. Back then, many families had a large floor model unit, and they would actually sit around the living room as they might today, but instead of watching television, their attention was focused on the sound coming out of the radio speaker. And radio is where I first came to know Jerry Lewis. It was not one night when I was 10 or 11 years old when I heard a new show on NBC radio featuring Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. I wasn't familiar with this new comedy team, but that night I thought they were the funniest people I'd ever heard. Funny enough to stay in my memory all these years. I was hooked. They had their radio show and some silly movies in the years to follow. Then the team broke up and Lewis went on to star on his own Jerry's comedies with his pratfalls, and Crazy Antics wasn't for everyone. But I liked it, and so did many others. He went on to a long and successful career, which included being loved by the people of France, where he was awarded with the Legion of Honor, the highest French order for military and civil merits. Jerry Lewis, he achieved great success in the entertainment field, but his greatest contribution came as the host and the heart and soul behind the muscular dystrophy telethons. Leading that effort from 1966 through 2010, Lewis helped to raise over $2.5 billion for MDA. That's an amazing achievement. And so we say goodbye to Jerry Lewis. As Bob Hope used to say, thanks for the memories. And thanks for your commitment and effort to focus attention and raise funds to combat a major health challenge. You clearly went above and beyond the call of duty. So, if you're feeling nostalgic about Jerry Lewis, check out the internet. His movies are there and will live on forever. I'll be back in a minute. The Today Show is coming up next. I hope you can stay around and spend more of your morning here on TV6. Keep our website in mind for the latest news anytime. Visit uppermichigansource.com for news, and you can also see this show at that same address. Thanks to Eric DeBroca for joining us this morning and providing some insights into the science of weather. Tune in tonight and you can see Eric's report on the late news. And thank you for being here. Let's make a date to do it again next Sunday morning.